stop pulling. It burns, please stop." The cry cut through the silence of Lincoln Park, like glass shattering. Grace Williams froze, her heartbeat hammering in her ears. The child's scalp was red, dotted with welts. Strands of blonde hair clung to the brush. And there, between the roots, something metallic winked under the light. "What in God's name?" she whispered. Lillian Oliver, 8 years old, pressed her palms to her head, shaking. "Please don't tell him. He'll say I'm lying again." Footsteps thundered down the hallway. Oliver Theodore appeared, expensive suit, Bluetooth in his ear, fury in his voice. "Why is she screaming?" Grace hesitated, trembling. "Sir, I think something's in her scalp." The brush slipped from her fingers and hit the floor. Oliver's face drained the color. "But before I tell you what the surgeon found under Lillian's skin, you need to know how it all began. How the perfect house in Chicago became a cage, and how one woman's quiet job turned into a war for a child's life. Now, step back with me to the mornings before everything shattered, when the mansion smelled like polish and silence, and Grace Williams was still learning how to survive among the rich. Each day began the same way. Light slicing through white curtains, the sound of distant coffee cups, and the endless hum of a refrigerator that never seemed to stop. Grace had only been in the house a few weeks, but already she understood how silence worked here. It was a kind of armor. You spoke softly, you didn't ask questions, and you never, ever made noise. But Lillian was different. The girl's laughter, when it came, was quick and nervous, like she was afraid of being heard. Grace noticed the way she flinched when sunlight hit her face, how she pressed her palm to her temple when the vacuum started, how her neck twitched as if something inside her head didn't like the sound. One morning, while tying the child's hair into 2 neat braids, Grace saw it again, a tiny wince, a shiver down the spine. "Too tight?" Grace asked. Lillian shook her head. "No, it's not that. Sometimes my head hums when I sleep." Grace blinked. "Hums. Like buzzing. In my dreams, it's louder." The word stuck with her long after the child left for her piano lesson. That evening, when Lillian's nanny called in sick, Grace volunteered to help her bathe. Under the soft bathroom light, she combed the wet strands carefully. And there was again the faintest resistance near the scalp. This time, she snipped a single strand and held it up to the light. The hair wasn't just hair. It was laced with something metallic, so thin it caught the light like a whisper. Grace's heart pounded. She slipped it into a tissue, folded it 3 times, and hid it inside her uniform pocket. That night, she searched online until her eyes burned. Metallic fibers in hair, micromedical implants, neurological testing. Nothing matched until she stumbled onto a page stamped with the Theotech logo. A patent description blinked back at her. Prototype, Child Neurological Tracking Interface. Down the hallway, voices murmured, low, angry. Grace crept closer, barefoot on marble. Oliver's brother-in-law, David Lang, was speaking to someone on the phone. "We need another scan. The data from Subject 3 is incomplete." Grace's blood ran cold. Subject 3. She backed away, pulse thundering. Stories like this make us ask, how often do people suffer quietly while the rest of us look away? If you believe every child deserves to be seen and protected, stay here. Listen all the way through. Their story deserves witnesses. That night, Grace sat awake until dawn, the tissue still clutched in her hand. Whatever was happening inside that mansion, she couldn't ignore it anymore. The morning light felt heavier than usual, pressing against the mansion windows like it was trying to get in. Grace had barely slept. The metallic strand she cut from Lillian's hair still sat folded in tissue inside her pocket, burning like a secret. When Lillian came down for breakfast, her smile was small and tired. "Miss Grace," she whispered, "can we go somewhere today?" "Somewhere normal." Grace hesitated. She'd already made up her mind. "How about a haircut?" she said lightly. "Just a trim, sweetheart." Lillian's eyes brightened a little. It wasn't unusual for staff to take her out. Oliver was away at meetings, and the other maids rarely questioned Grace's errands. She signed the car out, took Lillian's small hand, and drove away from Lincoln Park's quiet wealth toward a neighborhood she actually recognized. The salon was small, tucked between a laundromat and a corner cafe. Inside, the air smelled of coconut oil and hairspray. Grace's friend Tanya smiled wide when she saw them. "This her? Lord, she's precious," Tanya said. Grace forced a smile. "Just a light trim." Lillian climbed into the chair. Tanya parted her hair, combing gently, then froze. "What the—" She leaned closer, eyes widening. "Grace, come here." Grace's stomach turned. Under the bright mirror lights, the scalp shimmered faintly, tiny silver points, as if something metallic lived beneath the skin. Tanya dropped the comb. "That ain't normal, baby." Grace's voice trembled. "We need to go." Minutes later, they were speeding toward a nearby urgent care clinic. Grace kept one hand on the wheel, the other gripping Lillian's fingers. "It's okay, sweetheart. We're just going to check it out." The doctor, middle-aged, kind eyes behind square glasses, examined Lillian quietly. He ordered an X-ray, then disappeared into another room. When he came back, his face was pale. "These aren't infections," he whispered, eyes darting toward the hallway. "There are micro-devices, 12, maybe more." Grace felt the room tilt. "Micro what?" "Implants. Someone placed them there." Her throat went dry. She called Oliver. He answered on the third ring, impatient. "You took her where?" he barked. "Without my permission?" "Sir, you need to see this," Grace said. An hour later, Oliver arrived, his anger collapsing the moment the doctor showed the scans. The glowing images revealed slender wires threading through his daughter's scalp like roots. He stared silent, then said, almost to himself, "Handle this quietly." He took the printed report with shaking hands. Grace watched his face. It wasn't just fear for Lillian. It was something deeper. Recognition. Whatever haunted him, it wasn't new. The mansion was colder when they returned, the kind of cold that didn't come from air conditioning, but from fear settling into the walls. Oliver didn't say a word during the drive home. He sat stiff beside Lillian, the medical file clutched so tight his knuckles turned white. When they pulled into the circular driveway, he finally spoke, quiet but shaking. "No one mentions this to anyone," he said. "Not the staff. Not the press. Do you understand?" Grace nodded, though her chest ached at the thought of silence. Within the hour, Oliver shut himself inside his study. Through the half-closed door, Grace heard fragments of his voice, low and tense, echoing through the phone line. "You told me it was theoretical. Human trials were never proved. If this gets out, it'll destroy us." Another voice, rougher and colder, answered. "David Lang. You wanted results. Now you have them. Controlled environments require subjects. Oliver, you signed off." Grace backed away before the floor creaked beneath her. Her stomach twisted. Human trials. Subjects. Controlled environments. The words didn't sound like science. They sounded like crimes. Upstairs, Lillian sat curled on her bed, her hair hidden under a cotton cap. Her eyes were red from crying. "Miss Grace," she whispered, "am I broken?" Grace's heart cracked. She knelt beside her and brushed the child's cheek with trembling fingers. "You're not broken, baby. Someone else did something wrong." Lillian pressed her face against Grace's shoulder. "Then why does Daddy look scared of me?" Grace didn't have an answer. She just held her tighter. That night, after Lillian finally drifted to sleep, Grace began cleaning the playroom. Dust floated to the air like ghosts. The dollhouse, a tiny replica of the mansion, sat in the corner, forgotten, as she wiped the roof. Her claw snagged on something wedged behind a miniature bed, a folded envelope. Yellowed edges. Lillian's mother's handwriting. Grace hesitated, then opened it. "If you're reading this, Oliver, it means a move forward. I told you this project was dangerous. Protect her. Don't trust David. He'll do anything to finish what he started." The letter shook in Grace's hands. Lillian's mother hadn't died in an accident. She'd been silenced. Down the hall, she could still hear Oliver's muffled voice arguing behind the study door. But the sound barely reached her anymore, because in that moment, Grace realized the truth went deeper than anyone in that house dared to admit. Grace waited until morning light crept through the curtains before confronting him. Oliver sat at the breakfast table, untouched coffee in front of him, staring into nothing. His face looked older, as if the night had stolen years. "Mr. Theodore," she said softly, sliding the letter across the table. "You need to see this." He unfolded it slowly, his eyes scanning the familiar handwriting. For a long moment, he didn't speak. Then his voice came out broken. "My God, my own company." Grace's breath trembled. She knew, didn't she? Your wife. She knew what they were doing. Oliver pushed back his chair, pacing the room like a man trapped inside his own skin. "I never approved human testing. I would never." He stopped, staring out the window at the perfect garden. "But maybe I didn't look close enough to see what they were hiding under my name." Grace wanted to believe him, but the silence in his voice carried guilt. That evening, she left work late. The sky over Lincoln Park was the color of ash. When she reached her car, her stomach dropped. Both front tires were slashed, deep and deliberate. On the windshield, a folded note, scrawled in sharp letters: "Stay silent or lose everything." Her hands shook as she read it. Someone knew. Someone was watching. Grace drove home on trembling tires, every pair of headlights in the mirror feeling like a threat. Once inside her small apartment, she locked every door, pulled the curtains shut, and turned on her phone camera. The red recording light blinked. "My name is Grace Williams," she whispered, voice unsteady. "I work for Oliver Theodore at the Lincoln Park estate. If you're seeing this, something has happened to me." She detailed everything. Lillian's pain, the implants, the clinic scan, the letter, the threat. When she finished, she copied the file onto 3 drives and hid them. One under the kitchen floorboard, one inside her locker at work, and one in the mail slot addressed to a friend. That night, Lillian screamed in her sleep, clutching her head as if something inside was burning. Oliver ran to her room, helpless, terrified. "Make it stop," he whispered, holding his shaking child. Grace stood in the doorway, heartbreaking. The powerful man who once commanded cities now looked smaller than the girl in his arms. If this story makes your heart ache, it should, because silence is how cruelty survives. When you choose to stay with stories like this, to really listen, you're choosing not to look away, and that choice matters. By the next morning, Lillian could barely lift her head. Her skin was pale, her eyes unfocused, every sound making her flinch. Grace pressed a damp towel to her forehead, panic twisting in her chest. "She needs help now," she said. Oliver hesitated by the doorway, the weight of fear and pride battling across his face. "I already called our private physician." "Not him," Grace cut in, her voice sharp. "You saw those scans, Mr. Theodore. This isn't a rash or nerves. Whatever's inside her is killing her." For a long moment, silence filled the room. Then he exhaled, shoulders sinking. Yet the car. The hospital lights were cold and sterile, humming faintly overhead. A team of specialists surrounded Lillian's bed, their expressions hard to read. Grace stood near the door, hands clasped tight, praying. When the surgeon finally spoke, his tone was grave. "There are 12 devices embedded directly into the scalp," he said. "Each one appears to be transmitting live data." Oliver frowned. "Data? To where?" The doctor turned the monitor toward them. "Theo tech servers," he said quietly, "all tagged with your company's serial codes." The words hit Oliver like a punch. He stared at the glowing screen where the map of his daughter's head pulsed with faint blue dots. "No," he whispered. "That's impossible." Grace stepped closer. "It's not impossible, sir. It's happening." Oliver's jaw clenched. "I want them out. Every single one." The surgeon hesitated. "We can remove them, but it's risky. The implants are fused near nerve endings. If we make a mistake..." He didn't finish. Grace met Oliver's eyes. "You have to do it. She's suffering every day." He nodded weakly, collapsing into a chair as they prepped the operating room. Hours later, through the glass window, Grace watched the surgeons work under blinding light. Metallic fragments, thin as threads, were placed in a tray one by one. 12 pieces of proof that the richest man in Chicago had unknowingly turned his daughter into a science experiment. When it was over, Lillian slept peacefully for the first time in months. Oliver stood at her bedside, his eyes hollow. I failed her, he said, voice breaking. Grace placed a steady hand on his shoulder. Then don't fail her again, she whispered. Outside, the snow had begun to fall, soft against the hospital glass, white, cold, and silent, like the truth finally settling in. The storm outside mirrored the one inside Theotech. Wind battered the mirrored windows of the skyscraper, clouds rolling over Chicago like bruises in the sky. Oliver Theodore's footsteps echoed to the marble lobby, sharp, deliberate, furious. Grace followed close behind, clutching a leather folder against her chest. The eyes of passing employees trailed them, whispers blooming in their wake. They didn't stop until they reached the executive floor. The glass door slid open to reveal David Lang, already waiting, his smile thin as a knife. Oliver, David greeted, voice smooth and mocking. I heard about the unfortunate discovery. You should have come to me first. Oliver's gaze was ice. I'm done with secrets. David leaned back in his chair, unbothered. You're destroying our future, he said. Theotech was on the verge of something revolutionary, tracking neural data in real time. Do you have any idea what that means for humanity? Oliver's voice cracked like thunder. You already destroyed my family. The air in the boardroom thickened. Grace stepped forward, laying the folder on the long mahogany table. Papers spilled across its polished surface. Lab logs, time-stamped experiments, nurse testimonies, and a photograph of 12 silver implants laid out in a surgical tray. David's smirk faltered. You don't understand the scope of this project, he snapped. You signed consent, Oliver. You gave us permission. Oliver slammed his palm on the table, so hard the glass trembled. I signed funding for wellness research, not torture. His voice echoed down the empty hall, beyond the open doors. You used my daughter as a test subject. Security guards moved closer, the click of their boots sharp against the tile. David's tone darkened. You need to calm down before you make this worse for yourself. Oliver reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small silver flash drive. He held it up between two fingers, steady despite the tremor in his hand. This contains every record Grace uncovered, he said. If I walk out of here in handcuffs, it goes straight to the FBI. For the first time, David's composure cracked. A bead of sweat traced down his temple. Grace met his gaze. You called it data, she said softly, but that was a child's pain you measured. The silence that followed was suffocating. Somewhere below, thunder rolled again, low, distant, inevitable. Oliver straightened, his voice quiet but lethal. The future you built ends today, David. And with that, he walked out, leaving the empire of Theotech trembling behind him. The morning after the confrontation, Chicago awoke to chaos. Headlines screamed across every news network. Theotech scandal, human testing on children. Images of police cars outside Theotech headquarters filled the screens, crowds gathering with signs that read, Children aren't experiments and justice for Lillian. Stock tickers bled red as Theotech's empire crumbled in real time. Shareholders panicked. Employees fled the building under the gaze of furious protesters. The name that once stood for innovation now dripped with betrayal. Inside a downtown hotel conference room, cameras flashed as Oliver Theodore stepped up to a podium. His face was drawn, eyes heavy with sleepless nights. But there was a calmness to him, a man who had finally stopped running from the truth. Grace stood just behind his shoulder, her steady presence grounding him. He cleared his throat, voice steady but low. For years, I believed progress justified everything, he began. I trusted people I shouldn't have. And I closed my eyes to the harm that belief caused. He paused, glancing toward the flashing lights. My daughter was one of the victims of that blindness. A murmur rippled through the press. I was blind to the cost of ambition, he continued, his voice breaking slightly. But a woman I once called my maid opened my eyes. He turned to Grace, gratitude softening the tension around his mouth. Because of her courage, my daughter and so many others can finally be free. He drew a slow breath. Effective immediately, I am resigning as CEO of Theotech. In its place, I'm founding the Lillian Fund, a foundation dedicated to protecting those exploited by medical experimentation. No more secrets. No more silence. Applause erupted, not loud but genuine, like the first crack of light through a storm. Weeks passed. Theo Tech dissolved under federal investigation. While the Lillian Fund grew, Grace took on a leadership role, her name now spoken with respect across the city. At the mansion in Lincoln Park, the once sterile halls were filled with sound again. Soft music, the hum of laughter, the clatter of dishes. Lillian sat by the window, sunlight glinting off her newly grown hair as she painted small flowers on a canvas. Oliver watched her, a faint smile ghosting across his face. Grace entered with 2 cups of tea, setting one beside him. "For the first time," she said quietly, "it feels like a home." He nodded, eyes misting. "Because now," he murmured, "it finally has a heart." Morning light spilled to the tall windows of the Lincoln Park mansion, soft and golden against the kitchen walls. The air smelled of pancakes and paint, an unexpected blend of sweetness and creation. Lillian sat at the kitchen table, her small hands moving carefully over a canvas, brushing soft strokes of color that bloomed into a garden of her own making. Her laughter filled the air, light and unguarded, a sound no one in that house had heard in far too long. Her hair, once a source of pain and horror, now framed her face in gentle curls, each strand a symbol of recovery, of everything she had survived. Across the kitchen, Oliver flipped a pancake, smiling faintly as he stole glances at his daughter. His sleeves were rolled up, his once pristine suit replaced with a simple sweater. The weight of his empire had been traded for something far heavier and far more precious. Grace hummed quietly near the counter, wiping down the table where Lillian had splattered paint. The melody was low and soothing, a tune she used to sing to her own child years ago. For the first time, it didn't feel out of place here. Lillian looked up from her painting, tilting her head thoughtfully. "Miss Grace," she asked, her voice soft and curious, "are we family?" Grace paused, her eyes meeting Oliver's across the room, before settling back on the little girl. A warm smile spread across her face. "In every way that counts, sweetheart." Oliver walked over, placing a plate of pancakes in front of Lillian before resting a hand on her shoulder. "Because of you, Grace," he said quietly, "my daughter gets to have a future." Grace shook her head, a tear catching the corner of her smile. "Because of her, we all got one." The 3 of them sat together as snow began to fall outside, soft flakes drifting over Lincoln Park. Inside, the once cold mansion was alive again, walls painted in laughter, rooms filled with warmth and the smell of breakfast. The silence that used to hang in the air had been replaced by something deeper: peace. The camera lingers on the table, on paint-stained fingers, steaming cups of tea, and the easy rhythm of family finally whole. If you watch this far, it means you believe in something deeper than stories. You believe in second chances, in courage, in doing what's right even when it's hard. Stay with us, because every time you choose to keep listening, you help the next story of survival find its voice. Fade out on Lillian's laughter as snow drifts softly over Lincoln Park.